This is a video of me doing a front of house mix for the band Will Young at the Real Festival, Perth College. As you will see from the video, I was doing a mix on a Personas 24.4.2 Studio Live. This is a digital console which had all the dynamic and effect processors required I needed for the event. I only had 15 minutes to do a sound check due to time being lost resolving issues that occurred in the system. In the 15 minutes I had time to do a quick balance of the system. I began to set the gain structures and mix until I felt I had a balanced sound coming out of the PA. Using the graphic EQ, I began to fine tune the mix while the band were performing. Once the band's performances started, I began to apply some dynamic and effects processors to the mix while the band was on stage. First I started to gate the kick and compress the kick drum. The reason for applying the gate was to stop any spillage from other microphones and only being triggered when the kick drum was hit. I did not have time to use the dynamic processors to full effect, so I pulled in some of the presets on the Personas and tweaked them until I was satisfied. I then went through the same process for the snare drum, applying a compression and a small reverb preset. The reason I applied a compressor was to reduce the dynamic range to prevent any peaks and to pull the audio up if there were any mishits. Once I was done with the kick and snare, I moved on to the hi-hats. I applied the high-pass filter to the hi-hats to remove any unwanted frequencies that was not required. When I got to the toms, I panned them across the stereo field and the same process was then applied to the overheads. Once I was done with the drums, I compressed the vocals, again using a preset, and tweaked it until I was satisfied. I applied some reverb to the vocals to smooth out the mix. Once I had applied all the dynamic and effect processing I felt was required, I then began to do a more in-depth mix. I started to EQ the kick drum and toms to give them a more punchy sound. I then began to notice that there was a very loud popping sound coming from the bass guitar. I started to EQ the bass channel, trying to reduce the high end. Once I felt that I had a well mixed and balanced system, I began to move about the room and have a listen from the other areas of the venue. After a brief walk around, I noticed that I had applied too much reverb to the snare drum, so I went back to the desk to reduce the effects mix. Again, once I was back at the front of house desk, I began to use the graphic EQ to fine tune the system. Dependent on the songs and what style of music was, I then again tweaked the effects units such as reverb and delay. Once I was done with my front of house mix, I then swapped with my partner Jamie to then move on to do the monitors. Again, we only had a 15-minute changeover to do a sound check. While Jamie was applying gain and balancing out the levels, it gave me the opportunity to communicate and liaise with the band. I discussed with the band any instrumentation or vocals they required through their monitor mix. I then took my position behind the monitors and began to apply the send signal to the designated monitors that were asked. Through the gig I was checking the levels of each monitor by pressing the PFL button on the monitor path. This allows me to hear exactly what was coming through each individual monitor. Once the band were playing, I began to listen to the monitor system and use the graphic EQ to fine tune the system. If there were any problems or I was needing to communicate with my partner, there was a headphone mix set up at both ends of the desk for us to communicate. Once I had done both monitor mix and front of house mix, I then decided I would do the lighting for the next show as we were lacking in numbers. I'm not very accomplished with lighting, but this gave me the chance to go and broaden my depth of lighting. Overall, I feel that this event was very successful and has definitely deepened my knowledge of the live event industry. Given the chance again, I probably would prepare for the event slightly better. Overall, the response was good and the feedback given to me by the audience was very good.